Rivals of Aether 2 is officially released after a year of closed betas and a really novel free demo during the lead up to release. As someone who played through some of the betas and through the demo week, I'm here to say that guys, this one is really good. Its movement feels fluid, with depth, cast feels largely well balanced, and there's a lot of fun to be had in the game online with ranked, casual matchmaking, and lobbies with your friends. Through and through, Rivals 2 feels like the most well-rounded and polished platfighter on release that doesn't have Mario in it. By all accounts, Rivals 2 feels like a celebration for the platfighter community, from its humble beginnings, to its community funding, to the fact that it really seems to have stuck the landing. All in all, Rivals of Aether 2 seems like a true moment of triumph for Aether Studios and fans of the genre as a whole. But despite this, the more and more I've played, the more I felt something was missing. I'd do a wave dash, throw a crag rock, and sit back in my chair and say, wow, this is amazing. And then I'd lean back in and do it again, but that time I'd feel like something was off. Now, obviously, these feelings weren't solely felt through the action of throwing a rock. It largely is just a symbolic representation of my experience. Nearly everything the game presented, I responded with praise, but then it would be followed by this sort of bitterness. At first, I summed up those feelings due to being undecided about the game, a sort of ambiguity to wash my developing thoughts down the throat and into my conscious small intestine. But beta to beta, and even throughout the demo, the splendid taste continued to be followed with a bitter aftertaste. And now, upon full release, those emotions have remained unchanged. The feelings leaving me with a case of conclusional constipation. Luckily for me, at this impasse of opinion, I was at least able to realize why this was. Something was missing. Rivals of Aether 1 started as a small game. Small in scale, small in resolution, and small in roster. And yet it were able to succeed in a state allowing for more characters, more features, a story mode, a uniquely implemented arcade mode, guest characters, and even tetherball. Each edition layering and building on that foundation, but at its core was still that compact experience. Rivals was compact by choice. Its design was guided quite literally by the fact that Dan Fernacci wanted less work. Rivals 1 was made as a follow-up to a Smash fan game conceptualizing Smash as if it were made for Game Boy. And then carrying into Rivals of Aether, Danny Boy was able to carry over his gamed knowledge and experience, as well as ditching the said limitation of being made for a 2-button handheld. When making Rivals, so many of the game systems were forged and decided by Dan's own preferences. For example, Dan apparently hated ledge play in Smash due to his competitive time spent in Brawl. So what did he do? He got rid of them. And when it became hard to recover without ledges, then he added systems like Special Fall Wall Jump, or recoveries uniquely designed for ledgeless recovery. And his preference for play weren't the only thing that influenced his decisions, such as the decision for parries came from his preference to not have to make too many animations, cutting a shield, roll, and spot dodge animation down to just one defensive animation per character. A fellow gamer, Mark Rosewater, once said, "Restrictions breed creativity." And Rivals of Aether is one of my favorite examples of that. Each one of those listed situations bred a gameplay loop that was fast, snappy, and most importantly, unique. Rivals of Aether, while clearly wearing its love and inspiration on its sleeve, ended up becoming something that, while sharing the same core concepts as its inspiration, the way Rivals engaged with its mechanics made gameplay drastically different. In most other games, a huge part of getting back to stage when knocked away were the ledges. For example, if Mario gets knocked off stage, he has a set amount of resources. Another jump, perhaps a cape, an up special, and maybe even a directional dodge. Mario has a set amount of resource at his disposal before he runs out and plummets to his demise. And to restore his resource, he either has to touch the ground or grab the ledge to do so. With Rivals, the lack of ledges shakes up recoveries greatly. You may think that less options creates less variety, but what I believe Rivals does is the exact opposite. A large part of the ledge's appeal is the temporary invulnerability upon arrival. It's sort of a small breathing period for a player to take a moment, then make their own decision to attack from ledge, jump, or roll. All those options combined with the invulnerability can make the ledge an enticing focal point for recovering. If Mario's trying to get back to stage, is going for a platform or stage floor preferable to the ledge when the ledge has so many more benefits? No, not really. But the opponent also knows this general preference, leading them to often guard the ledge more than the stage itself, meaning the ledge is often not only the focal point for someone trying to recover, but someone on the offense as well. This leaves other recovery options mostly as an afterthought or a mix-up option. With Rivals' lack of ledges, while there is no safety net of invulnerability and overall less options to recover, when the focus of recovery becomes just to get back on stage and not to only touch the corners, I think it creates a lot more opportunities to explore recovery routes. I'm not trying to insinuate that it's better to not have ledges. Rivals' systems also have their shortfalls. It's just that what Rivals had was something different than most. While special ledge get-ups are a fun idea, I think the inclusion of ledges in Rivals 2 actually takes away from what makes Rivals feel special. It feels more in line with Smash, Slap, Nazby, Rush Rev, and so on and so forth. I feel a similar way about the inclusion of shields as well. The lack of them in Rivals 1 rewarded aggression and kept the pace of the game fast because at no point could you just stop and hold the button to stop all attacks. Instead, defense had to be played by either avoiding attacks or calling out your opponent's attacks with a parry instead. It was a system that put even more focus on movement and sped up the game as a result. Parries are still in Rivals 2, however, their presence in play has been significantly diminished with options like shield, rolls, and spot dodges offering far less risk. Parry still has its place as a way to punish your opponent for being too predictable, but its overall place in the gameplay loop is far from the forefront, and it's more of a surprise party to throw between everything else. That said, I'm sure as the game continues to develop meta-wise, we'll see the parry grow in usage as people figure out timings and such. The inclusion of shields also mess with other crucial parts of Rivals' identity. For example, in Rivals 1, you had 0 frames of landing lag when wave dashing, meaning you could immediately do whatever you wanted upon landing. But in Rivals 2, being able to immediately shield upon landing is far too overpowered, and so a small little window of landing lag was added to compensate. And those are just a few of the changes Rivals 2 made that makes the game not feel as much as a Rivals 2 sequel as it does another in a long line of, look guys, modern Melee style games. And if that's what they were going for, I think they did a really good job at emulating that core hook, without leaning too much into it to the point that it can feel sauceless, such as the case with Icons. But to find that happy medium, it feels like they abandoned what made Rivals 1 so distinct. And that's what's missing for me in Rivals of Aether 2. It feels like it's missing the core appeal of the first game. Rivals 1 was compact, scrappy, sharp around the edges in a way that no other game in the genre was even close to being at the time. But now it feels like when the devs have had the time and resources to stretch their wings further, instead of expanding on those elements and pushing them even further, they took the opportunity to just smooth it all out and create something more in line with others in the space. In no way do I find Rivals 2 to be a bad game, and I don't regret my pledge to the Kickstarter one bit. Playing with friends has been a blast, and this game in a vacuum is simply a spectacle. But when I look at it in the lens of the genre as a whole, and what Rivals 1 was in comparison, sure, Rivals 2 is the bigger game, but it kind of feels like it has less personality. If you don't quite understand what I mean, let me explain where I'm coming from. I compete at locals in Rivals 1, play 2v2 ranked mode and multiverses, solely play Randubs and Ultimate, Ember Dittos and Nazby 2, and any IRL hangout with my friends typically ends up with us around a PC rotating through each and every plat fighter in the Steam library. I'm someone who finds the most value in a plat fighter based off what makes it different. And Rivals 1 has things that make it different in spades. And while Rivals 2 has its fair share of unique traits, it largely exists in a way that feels like a bridge between the Melee Messiah and what its predecessor was. As if Rivals 1 were the trunk of a tree, Rivals 2, instead of growing and branching outwards and sprouting new leaves, instead it feels like as if they started to do that, and then veered left because the tree next to it had some really cool branches. At the end of the day, it's still a mighty fine tree, but I can't help but feel a little bummed about its direction. Rivals 2 is really, really good, but in its pursuit of bigger things, I feel like it lost sight of what made Rivals so good in the first place. Rivals 1 was a huge breath of fresh air when it released in 2015, but now with Rivals 2 released in 2024, it feels like something I've seen before. A while back, Dan Fernacey tweeted that when I was 22, I told people I wanted to make an indie game studio to make a competitor to Smash Bros. We made Rivals, but Rivals 2 was the game in my head. That tweet alone really goes on to put everything into perspective about why Rivals 2 takes that step towards the competition. That's what Rivals 1 was supposed to be, but wasn't. But, in turn, Rivals 1 took that restriction and blossomed it into its own little lovely thing. But if your vision this whole time was to make the kind of game Rivals 2 is, it starts to make sense why we see this sudden departure from the first game. Because truthfully, there was never a departure at all. Instead, it was simply a course correction. At the end of the day, Rivals 2 truly delivers on everything it was trying to be. But in doing so, I feel that Rivals of Aether 2 became an amazing game, but just an okay sequel. I do have that handy-dandy plat fighter tier list that can swoop in and make a nice callback and an easy conclusion to this video by just slapping Rivals 2 down wherever I think it belongs. But I want to refrain from actually doing that officially because I feel like there's still a lot for me to figure out about my thoughts and feelings for this game as I separate it from its first entry and evaluate it on its own. But if Dan Fernacey held my favorite little moth hostage and forced me to rank it where the moth gets it, I'd put it in A tier, between Weezer Red and Nazby 2. And as a closing note, I just want to say that I am very optimistic about the future of this game. The devs' open communication, as well as a solid foundation to build from here, has left me very eager to see what Aether Studios has yet to bring to the table. And hopefully what they bring is Krill from Another Crab's Treasure. The connection is already there, the moveset writes itself, and so on and so forth. Peace and love, Eyesore, the whatever, signing out.